All right. Looks like we're officially working and going live here. Just making sure everything looks straightforward. All right. Do one more thing here. All right. So, talking about some questions that have come up in our Golf 101 How to Break 90 Facebook group. And a lot of these questions really kind of revolve around some basic principles, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about. Really, though, if you have more questions, by all means, I want to hear them. I want you to let me know. And really, we're going to have this kind of as like an ongoing conversation, hopefully every single Sunday at 9 o'clock. Uh, what we want to do in the future is we want to also have these going live in YouTube, but apparently I didn't do my research and it takes YouTube 24 hours to turn on your live streaming ability. So, lesson learned, we'll have the next one live on YouTube and hopefully I'll be able to stream it into this group as well, do some simul streaming. Anyways, so the questions that we had come up in previous kind of Q&A sessions through our Golf 101 group is really like the first one was, we talk about how to get better contact. We talk about how to fix our slice a lot because this is really it's like the overarching problems that people have. But when it comes down to even like a more basic and more fundamental level of setting up to the golf ball, how can we do that to prepare ourselves to be successful and really kind of set the table and make sure that we are, in as best position possible to actually do this successfully, meaning solid contact, the general shape that we can accept of the shot. And then also, uh, what is that going to look like and how are we going to do it on a consistent basis? So when it comes to the setup specifically, the number one hands down key here is just straight up consistency. That's really the biggest overarching thing is consistency. And one of the points that I really want to make that I think a lot of people don't relate this to consistency, even though it is absolutely hugely 100% involved in consistency. And that is ball position. If someone is playing their round and then, they hit maybe 2 or 3 shots that are kind of fat, how many times, just ask yourself this, how many times have you wanted to just take that knee-jerk reaction and move the ball a little bit backwards so you can hit the ball first? And it's, well, I'm sure it was just a couple bad swings, but I'm going to make this little change. First off, if it was really just a couple bad swings, then let's not worry about it. Let's get it out of our head and let's push forward into whatever our next shot is. But we don't want to make adjustments for a couple bad swings, because if we're saying these are just a couple bad swings, then we're acknowledging that this is the outlier. This is not the normal thing. And this is not something that we should necessarily be concerned about. So it's a way to kind of take that little kind of mindset bubble that you might have, that you have probably lived in for most of your golf career, and just pop that little bubble and kind of open yourself to just a different way of thinking about golf. We all know, and I've talked about this God knows how many times, but we all know that golf is not about how good your good shots are, but it's about how bad your bad shots are. And so you need to ask yourself, if you have hit this, 2 or 3 or 4 shots out of like the last 4 holes, if you've hit them fat, you need to kind of ask yourself, is this truly just a couple bad swings that I can move on from? Or is this something that I need to address more concretely? And if you do feel that it is something you need to address more concretely, then rather than seeing you make a change in the moment in the round, I would much rather see you, kind of like take a mental note, or honestly, I keep a little tiny notepad. It's one of those that's like 2 inches wide, inch and a half wide, and like 3 inches long. I keep a little tiny notepad in my golf bag. So if I have a stretch like that, where I've got just like, for whatever reason, I was just in a weird headspace funk, whatever, I can write that down in the moment, describe it, that because I'm present and in the moment describing it. And I can move on into a more, how do I put this, in the best way possible, move on into a headspace that's going to make me a lot more productive. It's like I can kind of address it, acknowledge it by writing it down in my little notepad, and then transition it to like the past. It's a mechanism for me to cope with this, to move it to the past and actually just kind of leave that as something that did happen. It's behind me now. I've got this note. I'm going to address it later when I'm in a practice session, and we're going to get to it. If you're having inconsistency with your contact point in terms of fat, thin, things like that, chances are that you're swaying from side to side in your swing. You may feel like you're very solid and stoic, but the chances are at some point you're swaying. And what happens is, if I'm set up right here and this is the center of my swing and I sway backwards and then I rotate from here, it may not look like a lot, but I mean, that's what, 3 inches? I have now moved my center 3 inches behind the ball, and I've turned and tried to rotate from that point. And so that's something that is it's going to cause a lot of inconsistency, because now your brain can see and feel the difference. And now your hands are going to probably be the mechanism that tries to finesse it and finagle it and make it work. So when we get kind of caught with these inconsistency issues, because this conversation came up from a conversation where we were talking about inconsistency in terms of contact, and how do we set that level with our address? Well, step number one, like I said, is we're not moving the ball position around. So if you feel like you're hitting shots fat, we want to think more to ourselves, am I swaying? And how do I stop that? And that's really what it comes down to. Now, the solution that I gave to the student, David Hughes, who has since gone on to not only break 90, but actually shot 79, a couple weeks back. He was the most recent guest on our Sunday Conversations part of the podcast. David decided, and we were talking about that, a 3/4 swing can really, really help you minimize that extra movement. Because a lot of times it's when you get all the way up to the top of your swing that, it's this movement all the way up to the top that might sway you side to side a little bit. And so by really kind of cutting it back and focusing, it's what I call 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, just not over taxing yourself, not overextending yourself, and letting all of the physics in the golf swing do the work. You've probably heard people say, let the club do the work before. That's exactly what we're talking about. So, I like to see people really focus on getting a very good, solid contact from that 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And if they can hit the ball consistently, meaning not fat and not thin, at least 80% of the time from that 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock position, then we can go ahead and start extending that swing a little bit more if you feel like you have a hard time with rhythm from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock. But honestly, if you're going and you're hitting shots well from 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, why are we even talking about changing something? At that point, if you're really making good contact doing 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock, let's just go ahead and take that success and play with that success. So that's something that I really, really think can go a long way to helping people. It's the consistency of mainly ball position at the setup. And really, it's not so much like the consistency at the setup, but like the in between the ears mental fortitude to not make a reactionary change in your swing and just kind of think inward about what you might be doing. So we're not moving the ball back to put a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. We are simply shortening up our swing so we can have less movement. And like I always say, less variables. So that's one way that we can really go forward and improve our contact. And it's really just kind of like having the faith in our ability to execute that swing. And maybe we just need to walk back the length of it and only go 9 o'clock to 3 o'clock rather than going, full bore all the way to the top. So it was a great question. I believe that one came up from our group member, Joy. So Joy, hopefully you see this. Hopefully that answers the question for you. We actually just had a question come in the live stream here from Julian. Julian wants to know what my thoughts are on a single plane swing and thoughts on jumbo grips. I'll start with the grips first. Whatever's comfortable. I mean, that's easy. If you feel more comfortable with a jumbo grip compared to a standard grip, compared to a slightly oversized grip, whatever trips your trigger there. I mean, everybody has different sized hands, and you want something that's going to feel good in your hands. That's the same thing. Like, I've had people ask me physically, like, about the actual grip itself, what it's made up of. Do I recommend, rope cord diamond grips, or do I recommend Win grips, or do I recommend, just your standard run-of-the-mill black Golf Pride? Really, it comes down to preference. I know that I used to play Titleist DCI 962 irons, and they came standard with a rope cord grip, and that just didn't work for me. It didn't. I played with them for about a month, and I tore all the grips off, and I re-gripped them myself, just because I couldn't stand how that rope cord felt in my hands. Now, the grip I replaced it with was the exact same size, but it felt better to me. And I think I replaced it with Win grips. I currently play Golf Prides. It really doesn't matter. It's more about what you're comfortable with. In terms of a single plane swing versus a multi-plane swing, honestly, I think more people are familiar with and more people are comfortable with a two-plane swing rather than the single plane. But this kind of reverts back to not so much personal preference. I mean, in the end, yes, everything is personal preference because you're choosing whether or not you want to do this. But in the end, I think it kind of goes back to how you were taught, or how you self-taught, or who you modeled your game after when you were learning the game, and whether or not you're going to continue on that path, or if you are going to change paths. Meaning, like for myself, I always learned a two-plane swing. I dabbled with single plane, but it just didn't line up. It didn't jive with me. And honestly, at that point, I was probably already 10 years in to a two-plane swing. And the number of planes in my swing was not determining my score. It was the way mentally that I played the game, and more importantly, how I practiced the game, because I didn't know the appropriate way to practice to make myself mentally sound on the golf course. And through decades, been playing a while, through decades of learning, and through like a lot of these interviews that I've done with the podcast, I've learned a lot of very unique ways to practice to make the practice more difficult than actually going out and playing the game. So now I'm like, I don't get to play a ton. Honestly, I probably average like 1.5 times per week over the golf season. I just don't get to play that much because normally I'm coaching, or I've got all the other obligations of my life to do. And, because of that, I've had to learn how to, when I do find the time to practice, which we operate on a Google family calendar. And this is a whole nother conversation about making time for things that you actually want to achieve. But I have scheduled practice times on the family calendar. It's no different than a dentist appointment in our house. Marty's going to go practice golf. Sometimes it's in my backyard. Sometimes it's in the field behind my backyard, which is about 50, 60 yards. Sometimes it's at the driving range or at my home course because they have a green and I would rather practice on an actual putting green. So, for me, my practice comes in very like short focused bursts. So I have to make the most of those and make sure that that practice ends up being harder than whatever I'm going to experience out on the course. So that's just something that I've done and I've developed for myself. It's something that I use a lot with my students, but it's more about, you know, because I don't get to play that much, being very, very focused with my practice. So I don't get to, so I don't waste my opportunities on the course. And so when we kind of go back to that, that single plane versus two plane swing, you have to kind of weigh that the same way. Okay, what am I familiar with? What am I comfortable with? Do I want to invest the time and effort into a change? Because it's gonna take a long time for you to make a change if that's not how you learned. That's not how I learned. That's not how I was taught. That's not how I teach. So I feel it's unfair for me to say, oh, screw the single plane. It's not anything I've ever given a true chance. It's not anything that I've ever really felt motivated to give a fair chance, because I'm comfortable at the level of golf that I play. I'll shoot under par a couple times a year. Otherwise, I'm a handful over par on a given round. And that's okay for me. That's fun for me. That still allows me to be the ringer when, I get a call from a friend and they say, hey, I got a scramble going on. Can you come and, hit really long drives for us and make some putts? Sure, I'd love to. And the two plane swing allows me to do that. So it's something that we can kind of take just kind of like a general way that we would approach anything that's going to have like a significant time and effort cost attached to it. We're going to look at it and we're going to say, hey, this realistically could take me 3 to 6 months, maybe even a year to get to where I currently am with my current type of swing. Do I feel so strongly that this change will help me play that much better that I want to invest that time and effort into it? So, those are my thoughts on it. I don't do it because I just wasn't brought up with it. But that doesn't mean it's not something that could work for you. It's just not how I teach. It's not the form, the mechanics that I teach, because it's not the thing that I grew up with. It's not the thing that I go out and I do all the time. So hopefully that answers the question for you, Julian. Another question that we've had come through recently is more about, we talk about practice styles, we talk about practice methods, we talk about a lot of things that revolve kind of in and around our practice. But we had a question come up about reading greens. Now, reading greens is legitimately one of the harder things to do in golf, because it's not just reading, hey, does this turn right or left? You have to put a quantitative measurement on that and actually figure out how much is this going to turn right or left or wherever. So when we're looking at green reading, first off, I have to kind of get up a bit on a soapbox about green reading. The number one most important thing with green reading is speed, not whether it breaks right or left, because the speed of the putt determines the amount of break. We've all been there. We've all been in that situation where we've got, maybe a 8-foot, 10-foot putt, and we're standing over it and we're thinking, okay, this thing looks like it breaks, maybe a half a cup. So I'm going to go outside edge, and that thing should just break right into the heart. And what do? We hit it 4 or 5 feet past the hole, and that thing's going so dang fast past the cup, it doesn't have an opportunity to break. So first off, when it comes to green reading, you have to make sure that your touch is like 100% solid. It's got to be like, you have to know that you are pace-wise doing well before you even go out. Now, for me, and it's the thing I do with all my students, and I tell this to everybody, the last practice I do before I go and play is the 6-foot putting ladder. And it's, it's one of those things, it has become such a fundamental part of my process that if I don't do that as the last thing before I go and play, I am so out of my pregame headspace that it's an absolute crapshoot in terms of how I'm going to actually wind up playing that day. Normally, I feel pretty confident, but if I don't do that as my last practice, the knees are going to be knocking more than usual. Everything is going to have just like a little bump on that stress level. Everything's going to be one click higher on that stress level because I didn't stick to my own personal pregame routine. And so when it comes to reading greens, we have to make sure that first off, we have a good feel and a good touch for the greens. 6-foot putting ladder, that'll take care of it. You have to honestly devote the time to it. So especially if you've never done it before, you're looking at legitimately probably a 30-minute practice time just on that 6-foot putting ladder. But if you're playing a course you're familiar with, if you're familiar with how the 6-foot putting ladder works, you can probably do it in 10 to 12 minutes. So we want to make sure that we're good and comfortable with the green speeds. Now, when it comes to reading the greens, one of the cliches, and it's a cliche because honestly, it's a way that really helps people kind of figure it out, is to imagine where the water would flow on a green. Now, I'm always doing some weird project at home. I've got 5-gallon buckets all around my house. Half of them have kindling for firewood. Half of them have pool toys that my girls chose not to pick up. But one of the things that you could do is imagine you had a 5-gallon bucket full of water, and then you just took it and poured it out right towards the cup. Imagine where that water, as it's sinking in and starting to run off, where would that water run off to? Now, one thing that I always say, and this is a statistically proven trait, that higher handicappers almost always underplay the break. So that means play more break. If you're waffling, is it a half a cup? Is it a full cup? Play a full cup. If there's ever a decision that you're not sure about, play more break. That's really like a fundamental principle. Just like I'll tell my students when I'm doing a playing lesson and we're out on the course and they're saying, all right, I'm asking them questions. Okay, what's our thought process here? What are we trying to accomplish? And the pin might be, the pin could be like absolutely dead center of the green. It could be perfectly 150 yards. And, that student's going to say something along the lines of, well, my 7-iron goes 150 or my 8-iron goes 150. And, I'm just planning to, I've been playing a draw today. I'm planning to just kind of start it on the right third of the green. And that way, if it goes straight, I'm still on the green. And if it draws back, hey, I'm perfectly at the flag where I want to be. And I'm totally fine with that shot process in terms of like playing the shot shape. But what I'll tell them almost every single time is take another club and swing at 70%. That way we can make better contact. And if for whatever reason we don't hit that shot perfectly, we now have enough extra club to get us there. Because even if you ask like a PGA Tour pro, hey, how many shots around do you feel that you truly hit perfectly? They might say 1 or 2. Maybe on a great round, it's 3 or 4 shots that they hit absolutely 100% exactly how they intended. Now let's think about an amateur golfer, the weekend golfer, someone who's out there only playing, maybe like myself, maybe only playing once a week. Maybe the person just doesn't have the time. They can get out one day on the weekend. Maybe it's only for 9 holes even, but that's all they can get out and actually do. Well, that person who in all likelihood is probably shooting in the upper 80s to, maybe even mid upper 90s, that person is going to have a hell of a lot more imperfect shots than the PGA Tour Pro. Now let's think about those imperfect shots. Are they going to go further or are they going to go shorter? Well, chances are, if you're not hitting the ball perfectly, it's not going to go farther for some unknown reason. I think the only circumstance where that might actually be true is if you're using like a lob wedge or a sand wedge and you're inside of 100 yards and you really blade that sucker, yeah, it might go long. But 99.99999% of all other shots that you miss hit are going to wind up shorter rather than longer. So the idea is we take an extra club. That way we're not putting as much pressure on ourselves for perfection. That's the idea from the middle of the fairway. We want to apply that same exact logic to when we're reading breaks. So we're looking at the putt. We've imagined that bucket of water spilling and kind of running off somewhere. We want to now estimate where that break is, how much it is. And then we probably want to just increase that amount just a little bit. Now, I'm not saying, oh, I think it's a half a cup, play 3 feet. I mean, come on, that's just silly. But what we're thinking about, what our process is to try and put out that best possible shot based on our abilities, based on the amount we've practiced, and not put any extra pressure on ourselves to have absolute perfection. That's why, when people have 15-foot putts, when people have 20-foot putts, I tell them all the time, do not, unequivocally, do not try to make this putt. And almost always I get the little like Cocker Spaniel head tilt where it's like, don't try to make it. What are you talking about? I could make this. Well, yeah, sure, you could. But the statistics say that when you're outside of 10 feet, you're going to have a very slim chance of making that putt. So rather than us trying really, really hard to make that putt and, putting all this extra stress and pressure on our brains in between our ears, then we get over the ball and like we're trying, got to make it. And then we completely forget about what touch is. And now we launch that thing 6 feet by the hole. Well, now 6 feet is not a guarantee coming back. And we might 3-putt instead of just trying to just acknowledging that, anything really outside of like 12 feet, you're probably not going to make the putt. It's probably going to be less than 50%. So rather than trying really, really super duper hard, putting all this extra stress on ourselves, let's just try and put it somewhere near the hole and then tap it in. So green reading, as important as it is, I really think it comes into most impact wise inside of 12 feet. Honestly, maybe even inside of 10 feet. Because at that point, we actually do have a reasonable chance to make the putt. And so, yeah, if you have a reasonable chance to accomplish an action, absolutely set that expectation for yourself. Think of it like teeing off on a hole that has water up front, but then no water further out. So if I'm playing a par 4 and this par 4 is 400 yards and the first 50 yards are water, to say, ooh, don't get all stressed out about the water. It's not a big deal. You don't want to put all this extra pressure on yourself. Well, no, you do want to have the pressure of hitting a ball 50 yards in the air. We should be able to do that. Okay. So for me, standing on a tee box of a 400-yard hole and the first 50 yards are water, I don't have pressure on myself because I know that's not even within within any range of my abilities in play. And so, yes, I do set the expectation for myself to get over the water. And think of this just like putting. Are we having this unreasonable expectation of ourselves? Are we 20 feet away and then getting really pissed off when we don't make the putt? It happens to a lot of people. And honestly, it happens to me sometimes. I might stand behind it. I might feel like I have a really, really good read on this. And I take my 2 practice strokes and I look at the hole and I'm like, yeah, baby, this thing, like I've got this thing pegged. And I hit it. And for whatever reason, maybe it's more uphill than I had anticipated. And it's going like dead center of the cup and then it stops 6 inches short. I'm like, well, that's really disappointing because I had the break read perfectly. I felt like I had my touch there, and then it turns out I didn't. Okay. That's that's not a wonderful feeling, but at the same time, it's not something that I should have expected myself to make. Because even at my skill level, 20 footers are not going to go down with frequency. It's not over 50%. So that's an unreal expectation that I might have of myself. And it could cause me to get upset and to carry that frustration and anger to the next tee box where I might make another bad decision. And you can see how it can really easily start to snowball where you make one mistake and now all of a sudden you feel like you can't do anything because you're just kind of hamstrung yourself. So when it comes to reading putts, don't worry about it is the wrong attitude, but don't beat yourself up over it outside of 12 feet. We just want to lag this bad boy within maybe 3 feet. If you're really having a great day with the touch, lag it within 2 feet. Because then we can pretty much just aim exactly at the back of the cup, hit that bad boy with some force and bounce it off the back. Really, that's how since we're talking about green reading, that's how I play all putts inside of 4 feet. If I'm 4 feet or in, break shouldn't matter. Aim at the middle of the cup, bounce it off the back because it's moving fast enough that it doesn't have time to break. Now, of course, right now in our current COVID universe, with the pins having to stay in, that's a little bit harder. Maybe that's something that you only do from 3 feet because the pin is in. But normally when the pin is out and the cup is empty, I just aim at the back from 4 feet and in, and I just bounce it off the back. Otherwise, if you're 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 feet, I try to read putts in segments. So I'll look at the first half and then I'll look at the second half. So mentally, I imagine what's going to happen if I roll that ball perfectly at the hole, not playing any break. So that's really how I think about it is what happens if I don't play break and I just roll this thing perfectly straight. All right. I imagine the first half, it's moving faster on the first half. It probably doesn't break a ton. Maybe it breaks an inch. And then on the last half, maybe it breaks 3 or 4 more inches as it's slowing down. All right. So now I have a total of 4 to 5 inches below the cup that I think this ball would stop at if I aim directly straight at the cup and just let it fall. Well, if I think it's going to fall 5 inches below the center of the cup, all I have to do is replicate that action with my body and aim 5 inches above the center of the cup. So what I do is I look at dead straight and then I imagine what that's going to do. And then wherever that would have stopped, however far that distance is below center, I just pick it up and mentally move it that far above the hole. And then that gives me my target line to start the ball at and let the break take over. Again, recognizing that, really, we're probably not making a ton of putts that are 8 feet and longer. And so if it doesn't break exactly as I thought, whatever, let's move on, get to the next hole. So when it comes to green reading, segments, always play a little bit more than you think. And more importantly, just don't beat yourself up over a bad putt. You know, our goals need to be specific. And in this case, our specific goal is to anything outside of 8 feet is really just to make sure we don't 3-putt. I mean, that's really the goal anytime on the green, is just don't 3-putt. And if you can do that, your scores are going to be dropping like crazy. You know, sometimes we're chipping and our chip will get us to 6 feet. Hey, that's one where we can probably expect ourselves to 1-putt. And if we do it, guess what? We just brought our average putts per round down. So there's a lot of ways that you can work this to really kind of help yourself move forward in your skill progression, in how you play, in how you shoot. And really it comes down to, you know, how do we make that transition a lot of times between our ears? So mental game is like, I don't know how many of you people have creeping Charlie as the plant. We have it a lot up here in Wisconsin, and it's this invasive little plant that will just work its way throughout your entire yard. It kind of looks like clover. I mean, clover is another good example of a creeping plant, but it just works its way like through your entire yard. And all of a sudden you didn't even know that you had creeping Charlie in your backyard when like a month ago you saw a little tiny patch of it in your front yard and you realize it's made its way all the way back. That's a lot like the mental game in terms of how we play golf. The mental game has so many different aspects to it. It's, you know, and it works its way into all these different little facets of our game. You know, a simple question about green reading, like how do we do it? Honestly, we have to first talk about how we perceive it and expectations and, you know, what kind of overall we have been doing and whether or not that's realistic based on statistical data. So when we look at those things, we can then determine, hey, am I giving myself a fair shake? Am I expecting myself to do something more than the PGA Tour pros do? You probably are. So let's ratchet back the expectation on ourselves. Let's move the target from just the cup to 2 feet, 3 feet, either side, front and back of the cup. And let's just make a confident stroke that's going to end up somewhere in that zone. And if we can do that, we're going to be a lot better putting. So those are the big couple questions I wanted to address in this one. Thank you, Julian, for jumping on and asking some questions live. If you have questions that you would like answered, feel free to leave them in the comments of this video, or actually I'll be putting up, if you're seeing this on YouTube, make sure you go on Facebook and join the Golf 101 How to Break 90 Facebook group. That will give you the ability to ask questions a little bit, you know, slightly more directly of me. And it really, I use this group to help influence the content that I produce on the podcast. So if you want me to produce something specifically for you, I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to talk about anything golf related. But this is one of the ways that you can have, you know, a little bit more direct impact on what I produce. So make sure you go to Facebook, join the Golf 101 How to Break 90 group. Otherwise, if you are watching this on YouTube, why don't you just let me know, just in the comments there, what has been the biggest pain in your rear end in your golf game? Is it putting, like we were talking about, green reading? Is it, you know, losing golf balls off the tee? Is it inconsistency in your contact? There are a lot of different things that could go a lot of different directions with the golf game. And I'm here to help you out. Just let me know and I'll make sure that we get to it. So until next time, everybody, I'll catch you in the short grass. Cheers.